That's one of the most sweeping and one of the most determinative texts in the Bible for helping me understand why I exist, why the ministry exists, why the church exists, why the universe exists, why you exist. The ultimate reason you exist is unto the praise of the glory of His grace. And if you just linger over that, I mean, that's worth days of meditation. What does it mean to exist, that the universe exists, that the church exists, that history exists, that you exist in order to praise the glory of the grace of God? Well, one of the implications that hit me more recently, last year, was that grace is a response to sin. Grace is when you don't deserve something and you get it anyway. Which means that the purpose of the universe, framed from before the foundation of the world, took sin into account. So before there was anybody around to sin, God was planning with sin in mind. In fact, what's even more stunning is that His ultimate aim is that His grace in dealing with sin be praised. So His ultimate purpose did not just kind of work around, just work around sin. It required that there be sin. You can't have grace and people praising it if you don't have Christ dying for sinners and displaying the grace of God. These are mind-boggling things. And it's good to have your mind boggled. So many people run away from mind boggles. They don't want to have their mind boggled. They like Jesus in a little box. Just be manageable. And I'm wired to want to be boggled. I feel like I'm really not encountering God unless I'm being shocked. I mean, why would I think any other way? Just a little simple computation of how big the universe is, and that He created it with His fingers, according to Psalm 8. The moon and the stars which you have made with your fingers means His scope can't be any other than that if I even get within 1 billion light years of Him, I'm going to be shocked. So I'm not eager to make anything unshocking. I'm in the business of looking to be shocked, because I feel like if He's just provincial, if He's just fitting in, if He's just like your old man, then let's do something. Let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. We got better things to do than mess around with a little teeny God. Why would we even want to think of it? 2 Timothy 1:9, He saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of works, but because of His own purpose and grace, which He gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. So He saved us, called us, not by works, praise God, but, and He doesn't contrast it with faith here, He contrasts it with His own purpose and with grace. So not works, but grace. And then He says, He gave us this grace before the ages began. I'm just pointing it out that in the last year and a half, I've just been blown away by these statements in the Bible. that my grace, that amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me, has gone up in amazingness by being told, and you got it. He gave it to you billions of years ago before there was a universe. That's where you got your grace. One more. All who dwell on the earth, Revelation 13:8, all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Now, there are two amazing things there, more than two. One is that there's a book, and the book existed before the foundation of the world, and the book has a name. It's the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. That's the name of the book. So before the universe was, there was a book. And the book had a name, and the book's name was, this is the book of life. What do you mean life? The life of the Lamb who was slain. Slain. History doesn't exist yet. I know, this book will require a history. There will be a history to make sense out of this book, but the book is here, now, in eternity, and Christ was slain in God's mind before the foundation of the world. This is where it's going. As Christ, as God contemplated the creation of a universe, one way he thought about it was, I'm going to design a universe. I'm going to design a universe in which the apex of my glory will be the glory of grace manifest in the slaughter of my Son. The word slaughter is the literal translation of the word slain. It's just sphagizomai is an ugly word. Slain softens it. So God, contemplating what kind of universe he would make, says, the main event of the universe that I will create will be Good Friday. And it will be my Son, united with human flesh, who will be tortured and who will be killed like a lamb is killed, with his throat slit. Takes your breath away. Here's the other amazing thing. All who dwell on the earth will worship the beast, except everyone whose name is not been written. Think of that. If your name is not in the book, you will worship the beast. Which must mean that having your name in the book is the ground of why you don't worship the beast. He's making, whether the name is in the book or not, the criterion of who worships the beast or doesn't worship the beast. It's not the other way around. Like, if you worship the beast, your name's not in the book. Or, I won't put your name in the book. And if you worship the beast, I won't put your name there. And if you don't, I'll put your name there. It says just the opposite. everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book will worship the beast. All of it pointing toward where we're going in dealing with some of these weighty matters. One last introductory thought. We're still on introduction. I didn't always believe what I do today about what the Bible teaches concerning the sovereignty of God in our salvation. My home growing up was an evangelistic home in which my dad loved the sovereignty of God and loved the glory of God and manifestly prayed it and manifestly lived it. He didn't articulate it much to me. We didn't talk much theology growing up. My father was not a theologian in the sense of being an analytical thinker who faces problems and then solves them. He was a proclaimer of biblical gospel. He was an evangelist. It's the way he was put together, and was his calling. And I'm very different from my dad in that regard, in that I see problems everywhere. I'm just wired to see problems, and I devote most of my life to trying to solve them or cope with them because I can't not see them. And I've worked, in fact, relatively hard in the last 30 years to cultivate that skill, because I think John Dewey was right when he said nobody begins to think until they see a problem. When you see a problem, your mind comes into gear and you start working on it. But if you don't see any problems, your mind generally stays in neutral and you don't apply your mind to make sense out of anything. It's when you bump into apparent contradictions or puzzling things in nature or puzzling things in people or puzzling things in the Bible that your mind starts to ask questions and put things together and formulate hypotheses and rule out options, and thinking happens. And I happen to think that's a really good thing for some people to do. Not everybody should devote their energies to that. But I have, and so I grew up in that kind of a home. I'm deeply thankful for it. I absorbed a high view of the sovereignty of God, a high view of the glory of God. But I wasn't a Calvinist, not by a long shot. And at Wheaton College, I did not have my Arminianism challenged. I'm not sure whether that was intentional on the part of teachers or not. I can remember reading one book in particular about John 15, which I thought was very compelling about the fact that you could lose your salvation. But in 1968, I moved from Wheaton to Pasadena, California, and was on the brink of having my world profoundly rocked. Didn't know what I was about to get in for, and it was not John Calvin who did it, not by a long shot. It was a conspiracy of other people. Just to give you a flavor, I was so rabid in my belief in sovereign free will in my heart that I was in a class on systematic theology with James Morgan, and he was teaching on the sovereignty of God, and I didn't know what he was or what. He was saying things that I didn't like. And I walked up to him after class one day. He was quite a big man, and I was quite a feisty 1968, 22-year-old, and those were feisty days anyway. People going barefoot to class and wearing black armbands and marching in the street. And I said, Morgan, I think I actually called him Morgan. Isn't that awful? I said, watch this. Put this right in front of his nose like this. I dropped it. I dropped it. I remember doing that. Like, God didn't do that. I did that. I have a will. Like, that was profound. And I wrote, that was one class, and then there was Philippians, and I was bumping into things like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, which of course I liked very much. Next verse, for it is God who is at work in you to will and to do for his good pleasure. I didn't know what to do with that. And so those two, and then there was Jonathan Edwards. They were all coming together. And I remember writing in a blue book, final exam for that course by Jim Morgan, Romans 9 is like a tiger prowling around seeking to devour free-willers like me. So Romans 9 played its part, and just to comfort some of you, well, it isn't really comfort. I hope it's sustaining grace. I would go home. I was in an emotional basket case anyway because I was madly in love with Noelle, and she was thousands of miles away. And we were going to get married in December, and I went to school without her in September, 3,000 miles away. And so I'm just looking forward to marriage. And here my whole world is being turned upside down, and I'm about to get married. And oh my goodness, this is just a mess. And I remember going back to my apartment, single guy, back to my apartment and sitting down after class and putting my face in my hands and weeping. Which is, those memories incline me to be patient with those of you who have come to this and are willing to expose yourself to texts that we'll look at for the next 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 hours, and yet find it so difficult to fit it into the way you have seen the world. Tears are a regular accompaniment when worldviews collapse. It's not an easy thing to have your structure of reality profoundly altered, or some foundation pillars underneath shaken. It feels like your emotional equilibrium won't know how to cope anymore because you've learned how to cope with this vision of the world and this vision of God, and now these pillars are starting to crumble, and you're looking around for alternative pillars and they haven't been put in place yet. And so emotionally it can be unbelievably disorienting and distressing and sad and tearful. So that's the way it was. So those are my preliminary introductory remarks.